The monstrosities introduced to us through the literature remind us of the burdening nature of prejudice and our collective reaction as a society which alienates misfits and the unfamiliar. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein introduces the radical notion of monstrosity as a response to the fear of technology during the early 1900s, sparking the discourse of conformity. Conversely, Tim Burton's 1990 film, Edward Scissorhands, reignites the value of artificial life while recontextualizes conformity through the American setting characterized by the misunderstanding of truth and superficiality. Burton's context reviews humanity embracing technology as a means to understand the future and our current selves better, thus marking the changing perspective on monstrosity as artificial life. Shelley conceptualizes monstrosity as a corruption of innocence as Frankenstein's daemon seeks to discover himself after the rejection from his creator. Although the creature is initially sympathetic and seeks for emotional connection, the multiple rejections he encounters conditions him to realize the uncanny truth of his disfigured self, which is encapsulated in the daemon's dramatic outbursts. The stark juxtaposition between the perfect human figure and himself thus highlights the daemon's shock as he realizes he is merely a monster, yet not considered as a man. I had admired perfect forms of my cottages, but how was I terrified when I viewed myself in a transparent pool? Referencing Narcissus in Ovid's Metamorphoses, who dies of unrequited love for himself after viewing his reflection in a pool. This becomes ironic as the daemon becomes horrified of himself and in turn dwells on his harrowing differences. Biblical references of the creation of man further emphasize the daemon's damn existence, as he ponders on why he was created this way, evoking pathos from the audience as his innocence is contrasted with his ugly appearance, which is sadly out of his control. Burton conversely borrows conventions from the mythic depth of European fairy tales and applies this to a contemporary American setting. Although Edward's path to self-discovery is less pronounced, it underlies the narrative as his presence creates an imbalance to the otherwise uniform neighborhood. Burton's use of pastel colors with similarly designed houses create a highly manufactured naturalistic atmosphere. This contrasts with Edward's hedge sculptures, which interrupt the straight vectors, suggesting Edward's inability to conform. The obtrusive shot with the hedge being in the center of the frame additionally suggests an element of novelty by keeping Edward in the neighborhood despite rumors and mockery. This then spreads to Edward's asymmetrical hairstyles, signifying jeopardized order within the neighborhood. Edward's clothing choice additionally represents his isolation from the neighborhood, as the black tight-fitting garments allude to the punk style which stood on the basis of rejecting the bourgeois society. Prejudice sparked by Frankenstein's monstrosity instills fear among onlookers, burdening the daemon to reactions of disgust. As Shelley contrasts his beauty of complex muscles and arteries with grotesque imagery of watery eyes, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips, highlighting Frankenstein's gallant efforts to craft such a being, yet being enslaved to his work as he locks himself away in deep, dark, deathless solitude, being almost devilish like his own creation. The characterization of Edward Scissorhands conversely highlights an alternative to the monstrosity of his birth. When the daemon falls victim to his prejudice and seeks revenge, Edward has become an object of sympathy. Although Edward is initially perceived as dangerous through the symbolic telephone, as the neighbors first gossip about his presence, signifying prejudice and the blind belief in superficial assumptions, Edward's innocence is routinely brought out through flashbacks of his inventor. This humanizes Edward, as well as his inventor, rather than alien him like Frankenstein's creation. Where Frankenstein begins to disintegrate emotionally during the creation of the daemon, Edward's creator is characterized as endearing and fatherlike through the subtle use of facial expression. Burton's recreation of German expressionism additionally comments on the rejection of reality in favor of artificiality, as portrayed through Edward's extravagant hedge recreations of joy and wonder. The jutting nature of German expressionism thus emphasizes the rise of technology and the stability it upholds through its rigid structures. The notion of monstrosity and prejudice in Burton's context becomes warped, as artificiality instead becomes somewhat celebrated under the context striving for perfection and superficial happiness. Both Edward Scissorhands and Frankenstein embody the cultural values of monstrosity and prejudice in varying contexts. Where Frankenstein rejects the artificial possibility of life through associating with horrific consequences, Edward Scissorhands embraces this notion as a possible break from the mundanity of the superficial reality human has reconstructed itself into.